Hey everyone, I have another limit hold'em hand from yesterday's live session to take a look at in Pow Solver. In this hand, the button open raised. I 3-bet out of the small blind with pocket fours with the four of diamonds, and button called. Pre-flop, I thought my hand was pretty close, and it was. Basically a pure 3-bet, but could be right on the border of a cold calling hand. In game, I thought it was a little worse than that, but there seems to be a pretty big gap between 4s and 3s and 2s in this spot. Anyway, I get the Jack 10-4 flop, which is extremely good for me, and I went with a lead, which is basically pure bet on this flop texture. And in game, I thought Villain might get some raises on this texture, and I was right. He gets about 11% of raises and 11% of folds. Notice that he's immediately folding some high and low combos that are just too dominated to continue, like King 5 suited, unless he has a backdoor flush draw, Queen 5 suited. Even as good as King 8 suited is mostly starting to fold on the flop. So he has to be pretty concerned about domination. Also look at a hand like Ace 6 offsuit, which is basically folding combos that don't have a diamond or a spade in them. So these hands are just kind of afraid that even if they hit their best card on the turn, they're going to lose money. Anyway, in-game Villain called, and the turn was the 9 of hearts. And when I saw this card, I thought in-game that it was a good card to consider a check raise on. I rolled for it, rolled low, and did go with the check. And I can see here in Pio that I was more or less correct about that. My range is checking almost half the time here. And if we look down at our nice little hand fours, it is also checking about half the time. So this is getting to be a complicated spot where our ranges are overlapping pretty significantly. Villain folded some of his worst hands on the flop, and he should have more straights than me here on the turn, given that he has a bunch of 8-7 suiteds that I don't always 3-bet pre. I think I probably would 3-bet all the 8-7 suiteds pre. He has Queen 8 suited that I'm not sure I could have. We both have an equal number of King Queens. Just in general, it just seems like a good turn card for his range. And if we just look at the overall equity of my range, I'm still the favorite, 54 to 46, but our equity is getting close enough that it becomes interesting. Notice some hands that are checking from my perspective are Ace King, aces a decent amount of the time, depending on suits. And then a lot of hands like, so Ace 10 without having the straight blocker looks like a careful one. It wants to be played carefully. King 10, Queen 10, more happy to bet. So, yeah, and then I have all these pairs, 8-7 6s. They don't really have much incentive to bet. If I do check, Villain bets about half the time. And these hands are getting a little stubborn. 6s is starting to find folds. Obviously, Ace 10, things like that are all calling. But we're playing pretty passively if we check here. We don't have that many strong hands. In game, I did check, he did bet, and I did check raise with 4s, which looks good. Notice that if I just go back to the turn first decision, that 10s and 9s and jacks are all basically pure leading on. Oh, sorry, I have the wrong spot. Jacks and 10s are pure leading in his spot on, or in our spot on the turn. This is because we block a lot of Villain's value hands, right? Like if we have 3 jacks or 3 10s, we're blocking a ton of combo of his top pairs that if we check are all betting. So these hands basically want to go for, I think, a bet 3-bet. And if we do get raised, I'm actually wrong because the jacks block so many pair hands, it actually is not thrilled to 3-bet. 10s is a little happier too since it unblocks the jack. Notice that 9s is pretty unhappy too and actually kind of prefers going for the check raise. So it's kind of a nuanced strategy how we play our really good hands here. We mix in a few checks with some straights, like King Queen off is mixing in some checks, and 8-7 suited is mixing in some checks. But it seems like mostly we want to bet with our absolute best hands, and we want to bet with hands that block Villain's value. So 4 seemed like a nice candidate to check raise, and again, it was about 50-50, so it was fine. After that, the hand's pretty much not interesting. I raise, and if I were to... Oh, I guess one more interesting thing about this hand is that notice that Villain plays almost no 3-bets on the turn. Even the nuts is barely 3-betting. This is because at this point, he has a pretty substantial problem. He has a pretty big nut disadvantage here, and he wants to just let me bluff the river with my final hands a lot of the time anyway, and then he can raise the river. So when the river comes a blank, I bet now he's waking up with all of his straights. Basically, he's raising now with a straight or better. 8-7, Queen 8, King Queen all raising pure. He was this way. He's able to induce a bluff from things like King 7, for example. So yeah, so in game, Villain called. The river was an offsuit ace, and he folded to my bet. So that was the kind of uneventful part of the hand. But I thought that the turn strategy here was maybe the most nuanced and interesting. Let me know what questions you have. Thanks.